The biggest lesson from TickeTech is revenue quality. So I would say that's probably the number one guiding principle. Like you could probably rename PoroPoint revenue quality partners. We are like obsessed with that. And like every intern knows. I remember like when I was running TickeTech, people are like, man, Diego has EBITDA tattooed on his back.
Search Party is sponsored by Avid Bank, Boulay, Mayer Brown, Plexus Capital, and Oberle. The lead sponsor is Next Coast Legacy. Hello and welcome to Search Party. I'm David Snow, your host. And today we're joined by Diego Cuenca. He's founder of PoroPoint, and he is a two-time ETA searcher, having been the CEO of TicketTech. He completed a successful exit of that business. We're going to hear about that story. And we're also going to hear about Diego's background and what brought him to the ETA path. We're also joined by Katie Walker, a principal at Plexus Capital, and Tatiana Gaspar. She is a director at Next Coast Legacy. Everybody, welcome to Search Party. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having
us.
Great to be here.
Diego, I think it's also worth noting that you, in a, prior life, were a MMA athlete. Is that accurate? You were in the cage?
Yep. In a cage, in a ring, at some point before they legalized in California, a skate park. Kind of early days, but now I'm just a dad in Long Island.
Well, perhaps your MMA training will prepare you for the blows that Katie and Tatiana are going to deliver in this interview. It's going to be tough, but it's going to be fair. Diego, I know that your story, at least the story of TicketTech, has a lot of ups and downs, very dramatic. And why don't we start with the cliffhanger? This is the movie, the curtains open, and we see you. Let's set the scene. You are the CEO of TicketTech. It's the middle of COVID, and there's nobody in the office. And you personally, as the CEO, are delivering items to your customers. And it's worth noting that TicketTech served parking garage owners. And of course, during COVID, usage of cars plummeted. And so there you were trying to run a company that serviced parking garages. So it was not the most magnificent point of the story. Please set the scene for us and tell us how you found yourself in that situation.
Yeah, it was, we were, I think at one point, the most infected county in America. No one was going anywhere near each other. When the pandemic first started, we thought that this just meant people would drive cars instead of the subway, but then people just didn't end up interacting at all. Parking volume's probably down to about 80%, so not the greatest picture for us, given we supported 70% of the city. I hadn't seen my employees in person for probably 2 or 3 months, so probably not the most uplifting setting. I guess what was going on in my mind was, did I waste the last 6 years of my life looking for a business, underwriting it? I felt like before the pandemic, we were just righting the ship and gone through a lot of different issues. And then it's vain, but I was like, will I be known as one of the worst search fund outcomes in history and lose everyone's capital and honestly waste people's time? I think that probably was going through my mind. So pretty bleak picture at that point. And my thought was just take it day by day and go from there.
Diego, something that you just said there really struck a chord for me. You talked about wondering, am I going to be remembered as one of the worst searchers of all time, or am I going to lose investors' money? And I hear fear in that line of thinking. How did you work through that fear? Because it's so relatable, but I would guess it holds people back. How do you work through that?
My wrestling coach when I was in high school used to say this all the time. It's like, just score the next point. So everything seems really bleak if you look at a match or a challenge kind of in total, but actually just keep scoring the next point, you kind of find yourself in a much better spot. So I literally just said, no one's delivering tickets, I'll deliver tickets. This asset class kind of requires kind of a mentality of doing that, just scoring the next point day to day. And, honestly, I got a ton of support from both my investor group and then other CEOs that were kind of in the field. We were all suffering, but I think the community comes together. Even you guys as a lending partner, the reaction wasn't hey, what you going to do about this business? It was more hey, how can we help? This is what we've seen in other companies.
It's worth noting that we're not interviewing Diego because he's one of the worst searchers of all time, but because he's quite good. And in fact, Columbia Business School has done a case study about Diego's story. Let's go back to the beginning, Diego. What is your personal background? What kind of a family did you grow up in? Was it entrepreneurial? What gave you the desire to pursue that path?
Yeah, I grew up in between California and the Philippines. The first part of my life was in San Francisco. Then my family, about 6 years old, we moved back. I was kind of surrounded by different sorts of operators, not, like private equity backed, but like traditional, closely held family business. My father was in infrastructure with my grandfather. They built highways as general contractors and kind of grew up like around like master plans of like communities. My grandfather was like obsessed with bridges. So I saw like bridges all over the place. My brother was an entrepreneur as well. He had a nacho franchise at one point, had about like 100 units. Just being surrounded by operators, I almost thought it was like, this is what people do. And then my mother, I think maybe some people do a paper route or they get a job at the movie theater. She made me go with her to collect rent. And so I think I understand yield very early, and she was a big influence in my life. And so that's kind of the environment I grew up in. Pretty soon after school, I kind of dove into more of the financial service sector. And I think that the reason why I liked it, and I liked accounting, like I was a pretty big accounting nerd, was because I think that the language of accounting allowed me to like understand what I grew up with. It like kind of made my childhood make more sense. There was a real language to it versus just the offhand comments my mom would make. I could now kind of put it in a framework.
So it sounds like you grew up in a very operations, entrepreneurial type family. What else kind of tipped the scale for you and made you delve in?
I went to business school because I wanted to start a business. I think like at the time, probably Warby Parker was like killing it and everyone was doing a D2C startup. My wife had gone to business school before me and she knew a lot of like early employees building like all these cool like e-com. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do e-commerce. I want to do fintech. And then I think I was like at a Columbia Business School junket where like, everyone's having fun. And one guy said, hey, you should do search funds. And I was like, what is that? And then he explained it to me and I was like, that sounds like the craziest idea ever. Why would people invest in that? I was like, that sounds like complete fiction. He was like, no. Stanford wrote a paper about it. So I read the PDF and I was still like, this sounds crazy. Like, why would you ever do that? Then I went to business school and I met a friend of mine who became a lifelong friend. And I swear I didn't just do this in business school. It was at another happy hour. And at first we just talked about wrestling for like an hour. And then I said, what do you do? And he said, I'm running a search fund. And I said, someone gave you money for that? And he was like, yeah. In fact, I'm looking for an intern. Why don't you be my intern? And that was Alex Ginsberg, who's the CEO of a search fund company now. It was almost like I think the search fund model found me and probably found me through people that I already just naturally got along with. I interned for Alex. I worked for Jim Vesterman, who ran a great software company called Raptor. I got to meet the investor community through that. I think it really bit me once I knew about it. And I kind of never looked back.
So when you began your own search, what was your thesis? How did it come together? And did the thesis hold, or did you modify what you were looking for after you started to actually make the cold calls?
I think during my first search, I kind of fell into what I would say is pretty problematic for running a search. I think I chased after like the wins of the past. So I would ask, like what industry did really well 5 years ago? And I think looking back, that was a mistake. I think there are great characteristics from recent wins, but you're unlikely, I think, to find something in the exact same industry, And so I think I was chasing other people's ideas versus really coming into my own. But I found myself mostly attracted to, I would say, physical businesses. That's probably held true for my first search and the second search. Like some tie to like a physical operation, probably just because of my family background. I looked at everything from rural wireless internet providers to surgery center operators. If it had yield or there was value add, I was open to it. And I was indifferent between services and software. But I ended up buying a business that was a physical business. It was value add to a physical property. It dealt with yield and increasing yield. So I feel like it kind of came back to what I originally was in. And I think I remember the first time I saw TickeTech, I was like, this is like Raptor, but for parking garages. It was eerily similar. There was like a terminal at the place. There was a web-based dashboard.
Should I jump in here really quickly? Because you mentioned that in your first search, you explored varying industries, right? That's not what you're doing now. why did you change your approach to industry ideation? Was it lessons learned? What is kind of the driver for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say maybe there's three things. One is definitely lessons learned. I think intentionality on the industry you enter just gives you an advantage. It doesn't mean you can't close a deal on an opportunistic industry, but it gives you such a big advantage on, I know where this asset's placed. I know who all of the rainmakers are in the industry. I have instant credibility because I've been in the industry for like X amount of months you are in the search, or in some cases, like some industries I'm looking at, been in multiple years. Right. So you just know where the skeletons are buried. So I think it just gives you a distinct advantage coming in as a new CEO. I think the second is differentiation. I think when you reach out to sellers, like becomes very clear whether you're an expert in the industry or you have true passion for the industry. And probably just like third, I think you got to like what you do. We just went over like me thinking I'd waste 6 years of my life. I mean, another part of being able to get through that is like, I genuinely like TickeTech as a business. I think parking is super interesting. A lot of people wouldn't say that, but I think like the idea of like driving occupancy and adding value both to the end parker and the business owner, like I actually really like that. If you're going to do this for a while, probably going to have to like your job.
So you settled on TicketTech. Can you talk about briefly how you met the seller and how you won him over?
I met the seller because TickeTech was actually found by Tom Jackson and Clayton Sachs during their search. So before they bought DataCore, they'd found TickeTech. And I think this is like also like an interesting insight because the deal closed well beyond their search and, ended up going to me. And so I think sometimes great deals take time or they'll go from one search to another. I'm definitely not the only example. It seemed a bit far from the company they were running. And so they referred it to me. I took a week looking at it. I took the subway to the business because it was in Queens and I lived in Midtown. I met everyone there. And then like probably within 60 days, I was CEO. So pretty quick, not industry intentional. I didn't know anything about parking. It reflected a ton of these themes that I liked. But I would say almost like a shotgun marriage, maybe in some ways.
Diego, one theme that I think is consistent in what you're saying is like you have some really strong relationships and supporters behind and under your search that I imagine didn't just sprout up overnight. How did you do that? What are your learnings from that? What would your guidance be to new searchers on that topic?
I would just say find people that you probably naturally get along with. I'm still on group chats with other searchers and like we don't even talk about business.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's what you'd imagined a bunch of new dads would send each other, just like weird memes and stuff like that. And like, I actually genuinely get along with it. And I think even that's my first screen. Like even with thinking about an investor partner or someone to work with is like, am I going to get along with this person? Especially probably now because you're going to be in the trenches with them. Like you really want to go into this as thinking like, hey, who's the team that can make me successful? Because at the end of the day, you are the person in the arena, right? You need a great corner. And even though you are the guy or a girl, like it is a team sport, right? In particular, I think pattern recognition is always great. I have a great mentor in Richard Augustine, and he was like, Diego, we have the benefit of seeing like a ton of these deals. Leverage us. Don't think you're on an island. It's hard to see, but like I also have cauliflower ear, and like that probably helped a lot. Like Rich was also a wrestler. Alex was also a wrestler. Woody Baum was another entrepreneur, also a wrestler. Like you kind of just maybe find people that are similar.
I love that. I think that's so important.
It's a very long time to be interacting with people that you don't enjoy interacting with, I think is the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
So how would you say, in addition to that you fostered the relationships? And the reason why I ask is for new searchers that are coming in and they have found the folks that they're like, I think this will be a great partnership, but you still build the relationship over time, right? Do you have any advice?
I would just say, just be transparent. I think you want to be prepared on discussions, and like I use a lot of written documents and like things that make sure I have my data points ahead. But I think particularly investors, just be transparent, right? Like this isn't something where, you're trying to paint a giant TAM and a big J curve just because, right? These are long-term partnerships. You're going to be in the trenches. So like talk about assets as they are, talk about your challenges as they are. The investors know that you're going to need help. Self-aware searchers will be confident in what they're good at, but also like very self-aware that they need help. I would say like almost all of the ways we added value at TickeTech, we just like copied from searchers, like other searchers. I think like our product process was straight from Raj Mahajan. I think literally the whole process was from what they did at Super Salon. The way we looked at payments was straight from Data Core. I would say customers the same way. I remember one customer was like, man, I can't believe you are now running TickeTech. That's like buying something that's analog in the digital age, right? And like by the end of the first year, he was like our fastest adopter of like features, right? So like, I think that you can really turn things around by being a good listener, whether it's customer relationships or investor, just be a good person and tell the truth. That's really what it comes down to.
Let's take a quick break to learn about a financial and wealth advisory firm that you should consider if you want to succeed in the entrepreneurship-through-acquisition market, Boulé. Since 2005, Boulé has been committed to the search fund ecosystem, working with hundreds of ETA entrepreneurs across North America and Europe. Its unique tenure in the ecosystem means Boulé are uniquely positioned to partner with you across the entire life cycle of the ETA process. Even before the LOI is signed, Boulé is your trusted partner, offering guidance and discussion points as you evaluate an opportunity. Boulé can lead your quality of earnings due diligence, giving you and your investors confidence that you're buying what you agreed to buy. Post-acquisition, Boulé remains at your side with assurance readiness services and assisting with financial and tax reporting or other consulting needs. Wherever you want to go with an investment, the friendly, trusted advisors at Boulé will help you get there. Look for commentary from Boulé experts in coming episodes of Search Party. Okay, now back to the episode. So Diego, before we get further into your story, let's learn a little bit more about the parking garage industry. I understand from a previous conversation with you that there's some concentration. And so what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think there's some concentration, particularly in New York parking, right? There's a few really large players. When we acquired the business, it was about 40% divided amongst five, and then some bigger than others. That I think is like really hard for a searcher to manage. I think there's parking in general, which by the way, it's as varied as any other form of real estate. Parking in Atlanta is different from parking in LA. What property it's attached to is highly differentiated as well. Healthcare parking, extremely different from government parking. Municipal parking contracts, completely different from commercial parking contracts. Multifamily is even different from airport parking. So like there's a dynamic where they have to maximize the yield of the lot itself. Real estate's very expensive. And so I think New York parking is very unique in that sense. So we were a large majority of the market. So we had a lot of customer concentration. And then the market itself was extremely unique.
Did you know this coming in? So you said that by the time that you got introduced to seller and you closed, that was around 60 days. You weren't quite looking in this industry. So did you feel like you had a good understanding of the nuances around the New York market and other markets and parking broadly? Or was that kind of the learning curve from the beginning?
I did have a good understanding of New York parking. We did everything from like, we visited the sites. I talked to a bunch of experts. I had like an intern go on a motorcycle and visit all of the garages and like compare our technology versus others. I looked at like all of the items we sold down to the SKU level and what was the recurring nature of it. So I think we had a good idea of the New York market. I don't think we had a great idea of parking outside New York. And, I would just encourage like anyone looking at an industry, if it's a highly regional business, there might be a reason why. And I think we underappreciated that underwriting the deal.
Further to that point, can you talk a little bit about the due diligence process? And did you discover anything during due diligence that ended up becoming quite valuable down the line?
I got more and more excited on the growth options in the business to expand MRR as we did it. So I think we looked at the business and like, yes, there was like a high recurrence of using the software and then like high repeat revenue and selling tickets. But I just felt like so many things that I saw like at Raptor were there, right? Like Jim did a great job of taking like a lot of the physical businesses that they did, which was also similar. They didn't do ticket delivery, but like a lot of similar shipping of supplies and making that more of a recurring service or a drop shipping type thing. I was like, we could do that. I think there are opportunities in pricing that like honestly probably felt better for the customer, shifting it from a licensed maintenance model to a SaaS model. So I think during the underwriting, you can get a really good idea of where there might be some options on what you want to pursue once you become CEO. I think the diligence process is great for like, hey, did they say what they say they are? But also it's like you can find all of these different growth options within the business. I remember I was talking to one investor and he said, it's unlikely you will find cost savings in this business. And I think we found like a ton of cost savings within the first month. We went to like PEO, we found all of these things that they're misspending on. I think you can get a lot of margin expansion and a good idea of growth options during diligence. Probably the biggest thing for us was the opportunity in payments. I think that was probably the number one changing thing. It continues to be an opportunity, I think, in the parking space generally.
Before we get to the cliffhanger situation in the middle of COVID, so you acquired TicketTech, you became the CEO. What were the challenges that presented themselves to you during those early months and years?
Early months, probably just like, I think our transition was really interesting. And naturally, of course, like I think the sellers were very careful about employee relationships, and not just for us in protecting the investment, but I think also the members of the company were like family. You know, it was a closely held business. The business was as old as me. I don't know if I shared this with you, but the patent for the first TickeTech system was 3 days before I was born. So like I would joke with my wife, I was like, I'm kind of born to run this business, I guess, right? It was like around the same birth date. I thought it was funny. I was like, this is like being in my grandfather's office. You just had long-term veterans of the business. I mean, literally it was crazy. I was like thinking, I was like, man, like I'm a Filipino CEO. The top level is full of Latin Americans. The bottom level is full of Asian Americans. We're in Queens. I felt like this, it was so interesting, like how like I almost felt like at home, even though I was completely new. So those are kind of like, I think the positives of coming in. But I think the other thing was like, I was this second youngest employee. I was not from parking. I think that the employees were probably like, who is this guy? And what's going to happen to this family that's really taken care of us for a long time? Right. And I think the way Andrew Saltine was like a really, really great mentor in this sense. He was like, listen a lot, but come in with conviction and exude confidence when you come in because everyone's looking at you. So I worked a lot, I think, like on my opening speech, which was also really interesting because there was like an unplanned lunch and I had to give it in the middle of this lunch. And it was like not the most ideal. Like it wasn't like a town hall that you'd say is like completely choreographed. It was like, hey, we're having lunch. And by the way, this is the CEO. So like I started giving this speech, but people later said, hey, I listened to it and you didn't lie. Like you spent the first 90 days listening to us. You literally did nothing. My life got better. And so I think like it's really an opportunity to kind of build that credibility. But I would say they probably thought he's in over his head. This is a young kid. Maybe the family kind of sold the business because they don't want anything to do with it anymore. I would say like the other thing was that I never talked about the things that the seller did in a negative way. I always said, okay, these are the great things about the business. Generally admire the seller and still very close to the family of the seller because they built an awesome business. But I think to our earlier point, just score the next point, do the next thing.
Any other unexpected events that happened in those early months and years?
Sure. We had the realization that our product needed an overhaul. We knew that somewhat in diligence, but probably more imminent. We had a few venture-backed players. The first 3 months we were in the business, SoftBank, underwrote a giant roll-up of parking operators. That was not in our underwriting because, of course, I was not privy to what those investors were doing. I think the amount of venture capital coming into the industry was something we didn't anticipate. If we were catching a wave, we were just like right in there before all of that happened. Employee processes probably needed more work than we anticipated as well. And like how much work we had to do to make sure the financial functioned was also like a lot. So I'd say there's a ton of unexpected things and made the business, I would say in the first 2 years, very difficult to focus on growth because we were doing so much to fix the business.
So Diego, I know you went through quite a bit. And so you mentioned the importance of the investor relationships and the support system. How would you describe your relationships with your investors and your board as you were growing through those hard times?
I would say I was really bad at communicating early on. Something bad would happen and I'd have a knee-jerk reaction. I remember I called Clayton and I was like, man, like I can't believe this. They have such a bad impression of our solution. And he was like, why are you calling me? You're the CEO. Like, what do you think? And I was kind of like called him like immediately. I think that's wrong. I think you have to have a well thought out answer and like thoughts on it, even when you ask for help. Also, having kind of like a structured way of presenting information was not something that I had naturally. I think I had to learn that. I was probably a B minus communicator. That was a learned skill. You really make the board meeting about really the core issues and show that you have a real opinion on those core issues versus kind of showing up, presenting information and making it just like a overall free for all discussion. I think that your board expects you to lead. Didn't have that naturally in my first years of holding. I think that really came more naturally in the second or third when I just realized, hey, no one's coming to save us. I've got this team behind me, but it's on me and our team to get us out of this.
And Katie, as a lender to many ETA-backed companies, how do you prefer to receive your bad news?
Diego knows. Early, often, proactively, clearly. It's important not to let perfect get in the way of pretty good, which I am like really guilty of, or, not to fall victim to analysis paralysis. Like the most important thing is communicating early and often. And as Diego said, having some command over the situation, which is not mutually exclusive with asking for help. It's kind of like leading up and managing up to your board, to your lender, to your investors.
Diego, we're back to the cliffhanger. How did you get out of the dire situation you found yourself in? What were the most important factors that allowed TicketTech to right itself?
The whole community came out with like some guidance for CEOs generally. And I said, this is actually a great way to think about it. One is liquidity. So just make sure your company is a going concern. And I remember I was like, get this line of credit drawn and like, we're going after like our assistants, our PPP assistants. So like really just driving up liquidity as like first order of business and getting an idea of like, I think we put together like a cash flow forecast really quick, which we never really had to do because the business like was always cash flow positive. And like, I think we drummed that up really quick. So like getting a forecast of our expenses, that was like first order of business. I think the second was reaching out to our customers. I think the worst thing you can do is be in a panic because if parking's down 80% and I'm worried, 100% they're worried. And when they do poorly, we do poorly. So I think reaching out to all the customers is kind of the second one. Be like, hey, how are you doing? How's the business going? So like really getting a sense of how people felt in the business. And then employees too. What are you concerned with? What are you seeing in the field? And then I think third is really like, okay, we're in this situation. We've got money. We have a sense of the market. How can we maintain our revenue and then potentially grow our revenue during this time? Right. And I think those first two steps actually help inform the third step. And so when we really looked at that, we were like, well, this is a time for us to focus internally because not a lot of people are looking to increase their SaaS bill when they're worried about paying rent or human capital or where they're going to get demand for their parking business. So you're like, well, maybe we can take this time to do our payment product because by the way, we can probably save them money because we're going to get better rates. It's going to be more integrated into their system. So we focused on that. Another thing we did is like, maybe this is also time to shore up some of our tech debt and really look internally at our teams. And I think the last one is we came out with a digital ticket, which seemed to be really, really on trend. No one wanted to touch anything. So we're like, let's focus on this because it's real value add. It actually helped our customers approach REITs. So we really looked at like from a product innovation standpoint, what are the things that would help the customer do business while generating more recurring revenue for us? So it wasn't a transactional relationship with our customer. They'd be happy to adopt a new feature because, by the way, it helped their business. And I think that's kind of the way we looked at it.
I want to get to the exit of the business and, of course, what you're doing right now with PoroPoint. But if you could summarize what the most impactful improvements were that you made to TicketTech that helped it transform into a company that was sought after by buyers, what would be those factors?
First was that it was when we were exiting, we actually physically moved offices. And I thought that was really symbolic of what had happened within the company. We'd cleaned up a lot of things that I think were just low-hanging fruit for process. So we had a great financial function by the end. We had a modern tech team with a great technology leader. That was probably really impactful, especially when you're looking at a technology business. Our processes were very much product led, which I think before was kind of a cult of personality where, you sold things on a handshake, which is helpful, but also just like not a hard asset to underwrite if you're a potential buyer. So I would say like by the time we moved offices, the company just felt different. People were excited to be there. We transitioned from a primarily on-premise solution to a cloud solution. But I joke with this. I think I was talking to Tom Jackson. I was like, we did both an on-prem to cloud for the technology, but we also did on-prem to cloud for the people. So like our entire tech team was like fully distributed. No one lived in New York anymore from the tech team except our technology leader. Our product team was still there because they really had to be there on site, but like we really made it so we could access talent globally. So I think really probably the most impactful things was just changing the asset where it was clean, well run, and then the people. And I think that's ultimately what the buyer underwrote was that, hey, this is a great business to buy because they're product led, it's clean and run, and then they have a lock on New York City.
Excellent. So you exited the business in 2023. Why was that the right time? What was the thinking that went into your decision to exit? And what did your investors have to say about it?
I would say the hardest thing was like buying the business and then selling it. And maybe selling it was harder. We'd been approached kind of proactively by the company that ended up buying us. Flash, I think, was interested in us because New York was a core part of parking that they didn't have a real presence on. And so we talked to them for some time. It was always friendly. Still have a lot of friends at that business and, have a lot of admiration for what they've done. But I think, they really looked at us as like, this might be like a good add-on for us, given their focus and like where we're not focused. So that's how we got to even exploring exit, was just inbound interest. The reason why we felt it was the right time to sell was that we got a lot of value out of the business. We maximized a lot of the things internally. And we really were kind of coming to this point where if we don't sell this business, what's the next avenue of growth? I remember even thinking about like, hey, maybe we would like raise more debt, or we would like explore an add-on situation. We looked at a few add-ons during the time we ran the business, but ultimately I thought it was the best home for the company. It made a lot of sense within Flash's strategic vision. I think also it felt like we could really attack a lot of other markets that were kind of harder for us to do as sort of a regional business. San Francisco, Washington, D.C., we just had like a lot more scale if we became part of Flash. So I think those were the reasons to sell. And then candidly, I think the return to investors was a big driver. You put it in the model and you ask yourself, can I get to this level of return on our own, and what has to go right? And then it becomes a very, very much a calculated decision. I will tell you that that outcome of that analysis was very, very different from how I felt as an operator. As an operator, I felt I had just cleaned the house. I was excited. Everyone on the management team was like someone I had a close relationship with. And like, I think that was probably the hardest thing, was thinking about not being CEO anymore. And I think just candidly, it's like, man, I felt like I just got good at the job. So like, you're going to kick yourself out of a job that you just got good at. You found out that you weren't going to become the worst search fund outcome ever, right? And then now you're going to like kick yourself out of a job. Ultimately, I thought it was the right decision for the business and then for the investors.
That is so commendable, by the way, to be able to set apart the way that you feel and this idea, like you mentioned, of kicking yourself out and having to go figure out what you're going to do next, with that feeling of like, I wish I could stay, but still understanding what's going to be the best outcome for that business at that point in time, for your investors and all of that. That's really hard to do.
Diego, okay, tell us where you're going from here. You've had your exit. You're going to run it back. What are you doing now, and what lessons are you taking with you on this next chapter?
Yeah, I guess I ended up back where I was. I'm running traditional search fund. The majority of people were people I worked with before, so somewhat feels like the gang's back together. After we sold, I spent a year lifting a lot of weights and doing Cub Scouts and stuff. And like, I was like, I can't do this, and like need to do something else in my time, and didn't really feel like I wanted to join a company again. I think I just got good at my job. I want to compound those learnings. The idea of compounding isn't just the asset itself, but I think you as an operator get better. What I said is like, look, I like the community. I think it's one of the best things about it. And I wanted to work with those people again. And it was just like, I think the way we're looking at it differently is we're a lot more focused. So We really look at vertical services and software, but primarily with physical assets only. When we look at an industry, we kind of look like, hey, do we understand this? Where can it generate yield? I would say too, like probably not horizontally focused as I was before. I think we really, really want to understand the end customer. And so when we look at an industry or look at an asset, we really look at from that lens. What's the end customer industry that we serve? And like, how can we maximize value here? And what's the reason why we would be a great partner? The biggest lesson from TickeTech is revenue quality. So I would say that's probably the number one guiding principle. Like you could probably rename PoroPoint revenue quality partners. Like we are like obsessed with that. And like every intern knows, like I remember like when I was running TickeTech, people are like, man, Diego has EBITDA tattooed on his back, right? Like that's what staff would like say, or like my would say, right? Like I think in our search, probably it's like revenue quality. So if I have like EBITDA on one hand, it's revenue quality on the other. When you have a business, when parking volumes go down 80% and your revenue still comes in the door, it's extremely helpful.
It's hard to have strong revenue quality and not have the EBITDA that you need. It's tough to divorce the two, which is why you're focused on both, which I love. And I don't know, you might have gotten some pressure from Plexus to tattoo EBITDA on your back too. So like, no shade there. The other thing I just wanted to mention is like, I love how you talked about the broader concept of compounding. Like we talk about it a lot in terms of capital. And then you mentioned in terms of your experience as an operator, but also what's apparent to me is like you're compounding on your relationships. You've invested so much into those over a long period of time. And I think it's just so valuable to keep doing that. And I think it's gonna bear a lot of fruit with PoroPoint or revenue quality partners.
By the way, Katie and Tatiana also have EBITDA tattoos, which is great.
Yeah. We're all matching.
A real meeting of the minds here. Well, great. Well, this has been an excellent cage match, everybody. Thank you so much, Diego, for sharing your story. Thank you, Katie and Tatiana, for offering your expert experience here. We're going to go. So we'll say goodbye to Diego Cuenca, former CEO of TicketTech and now head of PoroPoint, looking for high-quality revenue businesses. Katie Walker from Plexus Capital and Tatiana Gaspar from Next Coast Legacy. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to our next conversation. Search Party is sponsored by Avid Bank, Boulay, Mayer Brown, Plexus Capital, and Oberle. The lead sponsor is Next Coast Legacy.